Hey, welcome to today's video. I'm Richard Chapo. I'm a internet lawyer in San Diego, California. Today we're taking a look at the CCPA effective date. This is the latest update on it, and it's August 20th, 2019. So the CCPA is the California Consumer Privacy Act. Almost said Protection Act. And it is a new California privacy law. It goes into effect on January 1st, 2020. Or does it? So the CCPA is a bit of a mess, and to understand why, we have to look at when it was originally enacted. That was in the summer of 2020. The CCPA has been compared to the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, the GDPR. And to give you a feel of the typical legislative process, the GDPR took about 4 years to be negotiated and enacted. And the reason for that is, initial language was changed. There was negotiations, back and forth, lobbying, all these kinds of things. And that's, 4 years is a long time, but the GDPR was a unique bill. The CCPA is also unique. It's a radical change in privacy law in California. And so you think it would take some time, but it was actually drafted and enacted in about 7 days. And again, there were political reasons for that. There was an upcoming election. It was originally in an initiative form. It gets all very complex and totally fascinating to attorneys, but not to many other people. So we'll just skip it. As you can imagine, anything that was drafted and passed in 7 days probably had some problems with it when the final version was issued. And that was very much the case with the CCPA. It was a bit of a disaster. And so since the summer of 2018, the California legislature has been amending various parts of the CCPA to fix everything from spelling errors to conceptual errors to conflicts with other laws. And even as we sit here on August 20th, 2019, they're still messing with it. There's still 6 or 7 bills before the legislature that looks like may well pass. The good news is by the end of September or in October, we should have a final version of the law. Everything should be settled at that point. And that's good because the CCPA effective date is January 1st, 2020. So we're getting down to the deadline. We need to have some kind of a fixed law. So what is the CCPA effective date? It's January 1st, 2020. It's always been January 1st, 2020. However, there may be some wiggle room on that date, and that's what we're going to talk about now. When a law like the CCPA is enacted, it's often very complex, and there can be gaps, and there can be areas that are vague. And so a legislature will authorize a particular agency to issue a regulation and then also to enforce the law and that regulation. In this case, we're talking about the Attorney General's office in California. Now, issuing a regulation is not something that the office just sits down and writes and publishes and you're done with. There have to be hearings. There has to be a rough draft, an initial draft of the regulations put out for comment. And then there has to be a period where people comment on it. And then there's more drafting and potentially more commenting and so on and so forth. And it's a process. It takes a while. And as of August, we don't have the first draft of the CCPA regulation yet. It's expected to come out in October. But realistically, we're not going to have a final regulation by January 1st, 2020. The Attorney General is not going to meet the effective date of the CCPA. And this is widely acknowledged and everybody knows it. And in fact, the legislature has passed an amendment to the CCPA. And what they have said is that there will be no enforcement actions filed by the Attorney General's office until the final regulation is put out, plus 6 months, or June 1st, 2020, I believe is the date, whichever is earlier. So what they're saying basically is, although January 1st, 2020 is the effective date for the CCPA, any AG actions are going to be delayed effectively until the summer of 2020. And, there's just no way that the AG is going to have final regulations before the end of this year. So you can focus on the summer of 2020. Now, that's important because there are 2 primary actions that can be brought into the CCPA. And those are AG actions, meaning AG enforcement actions, or private right of actions. So private right of action is when an individual has the right to sue under the law. And so if you were alleged to violate the CCPA and one of your customers wanted to sue you, that would be a private right of action. Now, under the CCPA, there are probably not going to be a lot of individual lawsuits. Instead, what we'll see are individuals grouping together on one basic theory, one basic claim, and they'll be filing something called class action lawsuits. And class action lawsuits you really don't want to get hit with one of those as a company. They're expensive and they're often very difficult to defeat. They can be, but they're a challenge. It's usually a bad day when you get hit with one of those. Now, the interesting thing under the CCPA is class action lawsuits are only allowed in one area of the law, and that is the data security, data breach area. So if you violate the CCPA or you are hacked and there's an allegation that you violated the CCPA, well, either the Attorney General can pursue you or the customers impacted by that breach can file a lawsuit against you. So, for example, Capital One. This has been in the news lately. Capital One, we all know, big hack. A programmer got into their system, copied millions, I think maybe even hundreds of millions of sets of data for consumers. Okay, well, that's a big hack. And now if this had happened in, let's say, January 1st or say January 4th of 2020, when the CCPA is in effect, private parties could pursue Capital One under CCPA, alleging CCPA violations. The Attorney General could not. They would have to wait until the summer of 2020 because, again, that regulation is not going to be out, and there's going to be a 6-month wiggle room period there, if you will. So that's kind of how we're seeing the CCPA effective date play out. Now, the important thing to understand is that private right of action only exists for data breaches under the CCPA. All the other areas of the CCPA can only be enforced by the AG. There is no private right of action. So if you screw up your privacy policy, if you don't distribute the correct information that you're supposed to distribute to consumers under the CCPA when they make a request, they can't sue you for that. Only the AG can pursue an enforcement action against you for that. And again, that's not going to happen until the summer. Now, that does not mean that you can go nuts in January. You need to be as compliant as possible January 1st, 2020. Because, if you start having problems in January with your customers and, they can't sue you under the CCPA, that doesn't mean that they can't start filing complaints with the Attorney General's office. And if the Attorney General's office gets a number of complaints, there's nothing to stop them in the summer of 2020 from opening an investigation of your business. So you want to be as compliant with the CCPA as possible in January 1st, 2020. You definitely want to have your data security compliance in full effect. You want to be 100% compliant on that because that's really the drop dead date. For the other aspects of the CCPA, you want to be as compliant as possible. Ideally, you want to have everything in order on January 1st, 2020. But realistically, things may be a bit muffled by that point. I'm going to have some wiggle room, and the wiggle room is necessary because we're not even going to know what the final regulation says. But you want to be 95% of the way there. And then when that regulation comes out and it's finalized, you make the final changes and you're ready to go. You definitely want to have your privacy policy together with all the requirements under the CCPA. You want to have all those steps taken. But anyways, CCPA effective date, it is January 1st, 2020. For data security, that is a line in the proverbial sand. You do not want to cross that. You want to be compliant January 1st, 2020. For the other aspects of the CCPA, you also want to be compliant, but you have a little wiggle room if you're not. The CCPA is going to be a radical new approach to privacy law in the U.S., which has mostly been a joke for years. So you need to be paying attention to this. This is something important. And the fines, enforcement fines from the AG and the private right of actions, if you should be hacked, are going to be expensive affairs. So make sure you are prepared and as in compliance as much as possible. So if you have questions or comments, you can reach me at SoCalInternetLawyer.com. You can also post them down below in the comments section. However, please don't post anything that would be sensitive or confidential because that is all available to the public. And feel free to subscribe to this channel as we'll be posting a ton of CCPA videos that will hopefully contain information that can help you answer any questions you might have. So anyways, thanks for watching. Have yourself a good one.